Hi, my name's Cara and you are here today to watch the sew along of the Alexa blouse by Atelier Jupe. I'm here as part of my brand ambassador role for the wonderful Lamazi fabrics. I've been provided a kit and all the notions just like you have in order to make this wonderful blouse, which was or is part of the November Makers Club, a wonderful monthly opportunity to buy a kit, and it has everything you need to get started on a beautiful project. Wonderful Liana chose this Lensing Eco Vero Viscose, which is a really sustainable fabric. It's so soft, it's got the most beautiful drape, and I have sewn a beautiful Alexa blouse in it, and so I can testify to how absolutely wonderful this fabric is to work with. I'm going to take you through the various stages of making this blouse, and I've popped timestamps in the description box below to make it easy for you to start and stop or focus on the bits that you would like support on. And stay tuned to the end where I show you some pictures and footage of me in this wonderful blouse. Happy sewing! So, one of the first steps with the Atelier Jupe patterns is to trace out your pattern. As you can see here, I've actually got a number of the pattern pieces over the top of each other. So I actually use a dust sheet for this, just a small tip from me. It's a very inexpensive, huge dust sheet that you then cut down, lay over the top, and as you can see, it's actually transparent enough. Obviously you can get dot and cross paper and also tracing paper, Swedish paper, all sorts of things, but this is how I like to do it. So I'm going to spend a bit of time now just tracing out the pattern pieces I need, and then you need to be really careful to make sure you've counted all of the pattern pieces, and sometimes on the pieces you actually have to join two pattern pieces together. I'm not sure that'll be the case here on a blouse, because as you can see here, piece one is the front of the blouse, and therefore I think we'll be able to get all of it cut from without having to join some pieces, but I'll keep you posted. So that is that all traced out and so on. And I did mention just briefly that on Atelier Jupe, in order to keep the pattern pieces to one page, they obviously put pattern pieces over the top of each other, but also you've got here, this is piece 5, which is the sleeve, and it's actually in two pieces. You've got 5A and 5B, so please just be aware of that before you cut out your fabric. So pattern piece 5, which is the sleeve, is two pieces that you then sellotape together. So there we are, all cut out. I'm ready to sew. And if you just check the instructions, if I zoom in a little bit here for you, you can see that on the Atelier Jupe instructions, you've got not only how many you need to cut out, but also the seam allowance that is used on each of the pieces, and also where you need to interface. And on this pattern, you've actually got two different types of cuff. So you've got a wide cuff and you've got a narrow cuff. So you only need to cut out one of those to make that decision before you cut out your pattern pieces and so on. But let's get ready to sew. So the first role is to create the button placket, and we do this having interfaced the section of the button placket there, as you can see in the footage, and I'm just using a heat ruler here to help me be really accurate with the 1 centimetre, which is the first fold we need to make when creating the button placket. Once you've created that first seam, you're going to turn it again, and this time you're going to press it to 2.5 centimetres to the wrong side, and stitch in place just next to that edge. So you can see there, just being really accurate in creating a 2.5 centimetre fold. Just take your time here, potentially increase your stitch length to maybe a 3, and create a really nice straight line that will define your button placket. Just take your time, easing through the machine and keeping a lovely straight line. You'll repeat the process for creating the button placket on both sides of your blouse, and here we are, there's a finished article, both stitched and ready to go. In the next section, we're going to be gathering the front of your blouse, so you need to increase the stitch length to 5 on your machine, and then pull some threads so that you've got a lovely long gathering stitch. And here we are, this is the top edge of your blouse, so you want to stitch across from one side to the other, leaving nice long tails at the beginning on the end so that you can gather them later. You'll need to sew 2 gathering stitches, one at 1.5 centimetres from the edge and the second at around 1 centimetre. Finish the side seams of the front and back with an overlocker or by zigzagging the edges. I'm just taking a moment here to show you the notches on your back piece when we are creating the pleats. There are 6 notches here, and these create a total of 3 pleats on one side and then 3 pleats on the other, so 6 in total. So just take your time when you are working with your pattern piece to define where these notches are and make sure you've got them accurately defined. Make the pleats in the back. Start at the left side of the back and work on the right side of the fabric. So place 2 markings of each pleat, right sides together, and pin in place. And you're pleating towards the right side seam. Stitch the pleats in place 1 centimetre from the top and leave the pins in so they stay neatly in place. So you can see me here just taking my time to work through the pleats, layering one on top of the other and then placing pins to keep them nice and secure. As you approach completing the pleats, just take your time to make sure they're nice and even. This is one of the yoke pieces. I just wanted to make sure that the back pleats are gathered as such or pleated as such that the yoke piece is going to fit perfectly, and there are notch pieces there to help you align that. And then sew with the 1 centimetre, and you just take your time here and just slowly take the pins out as you go so that they stay nice and accurate. The pleats are now complete, so give it a really nice press, and we're going to move on to attaching the yokes. There are 2 yoke pieces in the Alexa pattern. Place one of the yoke pieces right sides together on top of the pleats that you've just created, and then take your time here to just pin accurately across the top. And here you can see I've pinned the pieces. Once you've done this, you can actually then lay what you've just created there on top of the other yoke piece. So this is right side of the fabric to wrong side of the back of the blouse, and then reuse those pins to create a sandwich. So you've got 2 yoke pieces with the back of your blouse pinned in between. Just take a moment here to make sure you've got nothing twisted, and therefore you've got, as you can see there, one of the yokes at the back. You've got pinned across the top, and you've got an inner and outer yoke. What you do then is you sew across the top here with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. That is your yoke pieces attached, so give them a nice press both on the inside and the outside as we move on to gathering the shoulder seams to attach the front to the back. Take your time here, just pull on the threads to create the lovely gathers that will attach to the yoke that you have just created. Repeat this process for the other side of your blouse, and then we are ready to attach the front of your blouse to the yoke that you created, so therefore creating the shoulder seams. We're going to be using the burrito method for this next section, and so you need to roll your front of the blouse up towards the middle, and you need to roll the back up towards the middle. You then have your yoke piece remaining, and this is the inner yoke, and you're going to flip this over the top and roll towards you, and then you'll be able to see. You need to do a bit of searching for it, as you can see I am doing here, but then you'll be able to attach the 2 shoulder pieces from the yokes that you have created. And in this instance you'll be able to see that your yoke pieces are actually right sides together. So just take your time with this and just roll up the front and the back, have a sandwich in the middle, which is where the burrito term comes from. Here we are, just me searching for the other shoulder piece. It's here somewhere. There it is. There we go. And then pin them together, and that is your burrito. You will then be able to pull your blouse out through the outer edges of this. There we go. It's me just pinning the shoulder seams together. Just showing you there that you've got the front of the blouse, and you've got the blouse in the middle, and then the back yoke. So the back and the front, the yoke pieces are right sides together. There we are. Just take your time with that. Once you've pinned it all together, as you can see I've done here, sew it with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. You can then pull your blouse through, and you will have a completed front and back of your blouse connected. This always looks very messy when you do it, but just take your time. I promise it's all going to work out. There's no glamorous way of pulling your blouse out through your yoke, but it is incredibly satisfying, as you're about to see here, once I get it all detangled, shaken out and ready to show you. So bear with, it's coming. Ta-da! There we are. How satisfying is that? And then take a moment to pull out various gathering threads and so on that might still be visible. So there you go. That is probably the hardest part of this blouse completed. Well done. I've just taken a moment here to pop this on my mannequin and just show you how we're looking so far. So you've got the lovely pleats on the back, you're nice and yoked, all connected, and inside and out the blouse is looking really smart. Yeah, really satisfying. So the next stage is to actually finish the side seams. So we've overlocked the side seams beforehand, as you'll have seen, and then we're going to be attaching the side seams and the front and the back. So just pop them on top of each other, right sides together, pop some pins down, and then head to the sewing machine and sew this with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Once you've sewn your side seams, take it to the ironing board and open your side seams there. Just creates a really nice finish. So you can do this both on the inside and the outside. This gives you a really professional finish. Worth taking the effort to do these moments as you go along, as is trimming your threads as you go. All those tiny details make a really big difference. Gosh, this beautiful fabric, it's such a stunning fabric to work with, just dreamy, making this sewing process absolutely lovely. We're creating the collar next, so you've got 2 collar pieces and they are both interfaced, and you just want to select one of them and turn up 1 centimetre from the bottom seam allowance of one collar piece to the wrong side, And then we place both collar pieces right side together and pin. We're stitching the top and sides of the collar, stopping at 1 centimetre from the bottom edge, so don't stitch the pre-pressed seam allowance. When sewing the collar, just take your time to be really nice and accurate with the measurements. As you can see here, I'm just double checking all of my sewing so that, and you're leaving that last centimetre there as unstitched, because this is your folded seam allowance. Once you've stitched the collar, turn it right sides out, and then just take a moment, as you can see here, just using one of these tools to help me get a really nice curve on that edge, and then we'll be able to ready to attach this to the shirt itself, or the blouse itself. And here, just take your time. We're going to pin all the way around the neckline, just making sure the notches and so on match up. So you've got notches at your shoulder seam, notches at the front, and just take your time, work your way around and ease the collar in. I did find actually that I needed to, I did this a couple of times, so I just took my time, and I just found that I did need to ease it on a little bit, but yeah, sometimes it takes 1 or 2 times to accurately pin, but just take your time with this stage. Once your collar is attached to your neckline, take a moment to trim the seam allowances and snip into the curves just to ensure for a really smooth installation. And here we are, we're going to now iron the seam allowance up into the collar on the other side, and we are actually going to stitch now. So here you can see I'm going to move that, push that seam allowance up under the collar, and I have actually elected to slip stitch this seam in place. Now in the instructions it is recommended that you sew from the other side, so you would stitch in the ditch from the other side of the collar, but in this instance I decided to pin, as you can see here, nice and accurately, so that it's a really smooth installation, no puckers, no folds being created on the outside of the collar or the inside. Just take your time here again, and I found that pressing the collar made a really big difference. And I'm just showing you here once again on my mannequin that your collar is now completed. Congratulations! And there we are from a front view as well. So yeah, really making great progress on this project now. We now move on to creating the sleeve. So some preparation we need to do beforehand. So just make sure you've got all your notches in place, and this is me showing that we're going to be gathering in between these notches on the sleeve head. So on your machine, pop it onto the longest stitch length. On my machine that happens to be a 5, and then we'll be gathering the stitches there. So you're going to be doing one row at 1.5 centimetres and another at 1 centimetre, following the instruction details there, and then just gather a nice gathered head there. And we're also going to be gathering along the bottom of the sleeve as well, and it's the same principle. So a nice long stitch length and 2 rows of gathering stitches, 1.5 centimetres from the edge and 1 centimetre from the edge. At this stage, pop your sleeve right sides together so that the edges are aligned. We have overlocked the edges on a previous occasion. Pop some pins in, and then you're going to sew this with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Once you've done the stitch, just open your seam allowances as we have done in the past, and just give that a nice press to maintain a really nice professional finish. At this stage you're going to gather both the sleeve head and the cuff, and in hindsight the sleeve head requires very little gathering, but the cuff itself, in my experience, requires quite a lot of gathering, and you're going to repeat this for the other sleeve, so you end up with 2 sleeves ready to be inserted into your blouse. We're moving on to creating the cuff now. So you've got 2 cuff pieces, and there are actually 2 different types of cuff, and I'm electing to make the deep cuff, which is what I'll be showing you in the sew along here. So we've got some notches at the side and the top, and this will help you with the installation a little bit later on. But what I'm going to do now is just do a little bit of preparation. So I'm going to take this to the ironing board, and we're actually going to iron over 1 centimetre on one of the sides of the cuff, and you'll repeat that for the other side as well. You then actually fold it wrong sides together and create a crease in the middle of the cuff. Again, this helps with your installation in a little moment. You then put the cuffs right sides together, so you fold them in half, as you can see here, and we're going to sew all the way down there with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now you can see you've got sort of the pre-pressed folds there, which will help us in a little while. The instructions have you create these folds after you've sewn the side seam. I just felt it was easier to do the creases before sewing the side seam. Open up your seam allowance and give it a nice press, trying not to remove the lovely creases that you've done and created in the previous step. We can then very easily use those lovely creases to create the top fold there, so that's turning over the 1 centimetre to the wrong side, as you can see illustrated here, and also repeat that for both cuffs. We are then going to be creating the cuff of the blouse, and in this case you insert your sleeve into the cuff. So you're going to put your raw edges together, so you can just see me here bunching up the sleeve, and this is quite a voluminous sleeve, so there's quite a lot of fabric to put into this little cuff area here. And what you're looking for is to line up your seams, so your underarm seam, which is just out of shot there, the underarm seam with the inner seam of the cuff, and then you're going to pin all the way around the top and take some time to make sure that your gathering is nice and even. You can see me there just popping the pins in, making it nice and even, but as I say, there is a lot of fabric in this section. Once you've sewn the edge of the cuff to the blouse, you're actually going to now pull this through, so here we are, and repeat that for the other side, and then just take a few moments to remove any gathering stitches and so on. Working from the wrong side of the sleeve, so you can see here now that the cuff is nice and neatly turned back on itself, and I've ironed the seam allowances up into the cuff, similar to what we did with the collar. And I've elected again to hand stitch the cuff to the blouse. I have found that the cuff itself is quite narrow, so I couldn't get it onto the foot plate of the sewing machine, and so a lovely hand stitch here to attach this is just the ticket. On to the final part of creating your sleeve, and so you're going to pop the sleeve into the blouse itself, and you're going to match the seams and then the front notches and the back notch, and then there's also a notch at the shoulder head. And then take your time moving your gather stitches to create a really even seam around the top of your sleeve head, and sew it at a 1 centimetre seam allowance. That is sleeve complete. And all I've done then is finish the insides using overlocker just to tidy up the seams. You can see there the sleeve has gone in really nicely, not much easing required, and as I said before, the sleeve head itself didn't require too much gathering. Then all that remains on this beautiful Alexa blouse is for you to choose your buttons, create your buttonholes and do a hem. Stay tuned for some pictures of me in this amazing blouse. Thank you for watching.